Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Criminal Justice Corner. Here at Criminal Justice Corner, we give you the real details surrounding the case, and just in case you find yourself in the same situation, we give you potential actionable advice so that you can potentially get yourself out of it. As always, I have with me a very special guest. Today, my guest is Tracy DeTomasi. Am I saying that right?
You did, yeah, DeTomasi.
Awesome. Check that out. So, Tracy, can you give the audience a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me on as a guest. I am a licensed clinical social worker by training. I have been working in gender-based violence for 25 years now in all sorts of aspects, whether that's sexual violence, domestic violence, child welfare, child abuse. I've kind of done everything. And I actually started my career as a therapist for adolescent sex offenders. And so I had started with the offender side and then got into victim services, including really starting to address building a program that addressed the culture that supports violence against women, and getting men involved in the conversation because the culture with that we're not going to solve this problem, one, if we don't get men involved, and two,
Yeah.
if we don't support the culture. And for the last 3 years, I've been the CEO of Callisto, which is an amazing nonprofit that I can't wait to share about.
And you know that was going to be my next question because today we're going to talk a lot about Callisto and what it does for others and how it helps people. So give us a little bit of background of how did it even come about? How did you start a nonprofit, first of all? And where did Callisto like gain its roots?
Yeah, so our roots kind of were planted about 10 years ago or so by Jess Ladd. She is our founder.
Okay.
And she was assaulted in college. She was sexually
What?
assaulted in college. And then she reported, and the reporting was just as traumatic as the assault for her, which I think is extremely common for survivors of
I
sexual
was going to say
assaults.
that. I've heard that before, but go
It
ahead.
absolutely is. And she wanted to solve it. And so she did a lot of research and she found out that 90% of sexual assaults on college campuses are committed by serial perpetrators who, on average, offend 6 times while they're in college. And
What?
so if you can identify a serial perpetrator and hold them accountable after 2 assaults, which is too
Okay.
many, but if you can do that after two versus getting to the six, that's going to reduce college sexual assault by 59%. So
Wow.
most prevention in on college campuses is about bystander intervention, which still assumes that an assault is going to happen, that you have to intervene in the assault happening, which for most of us, that's not super realistic.
Right.
Or it's education, which is all important, but it's not tackling the perpetrator. And
Yeah.
having worked with perpetrators, I know that perpetrator accountability is the key factor in that. So that was really where we got started. And we've taken a bunch of iterations from that. And what we do now is that we have built this end-to-end encrypted technology. So what that means is that all of the data that gets stored in our technology is encrypted before it hits our servers. So it's extremely secure because we know that survivors need that security. And if survivors are looking to find out if their perpetrator has harmed somebody else, we have what's called a matching system. And so anybody in the country with a .edu email address in the country, in the US and its territories, has free access to this platform. You just sign up with it with your .edu, then you can switch to your Gmail or your Outlook or some personal email so it's not always connected to your school email, but you have free access. And what you do is you go in, you put in the state where the assault occurred, and that's because sexual assault laws vary by state, and you put in a unique identifier of the perpetrator. So the perpetrator's email address, phone number, social media handles, there's about 12 different categories that you can do, and you
Okay.
put in as many as you know, and that's what we match on. So if two people put in the same Instagram handle, there's a match. They're not notified right away. It's not like a dating app. What they do is we get notified, but we don't see the offender's information or the survivor's information. And that's because lists like that get shut down for defamation. We are not something that you can search through, and we're not a warning system. What happens is we assign that case to a legal options counselor who is a confidential advocate who's trauma informed, and they reach out to the survivor separately to say, there's been a match. Did you want to meet? The survivor then has a choice to make because we make sure that all of this is within the hands of the survivor, and the survivor has the choice all along the way. And the survivor chooses to meet with that legal options counselor or not. If they choose to meet with them, then they tell what happened, and that's the first time they have to tell what happened because explaining what happened can be really traumatic.
Yeah.
And then they get options. So what does a criminal justice system look like for them? What does civil justice look like? What does Title IX look like? What does it look like to blast their perpetrator's name on social media? What are mental health services? Whatever that they need. And then they are told about they're not anything about the other person, but they're told that there's another person, and then they have another choice to make. Do they want to reveal their identity to the other person and connect with them? If they do and they consent and the other people that have matched have consented as well, that legal option counselor will work to connect those two or three or however many that have matched to be able to pursue healing and justice, whatever that means for them. We do not define that for the survivors. So we are not a reporting system. We don't report to police. We don't report to Title IX. We don't report to HR because that is the decision that the survivor needs to make. And we don't investigate what happened. We are really about connecting those survivors because if you think about the Me Too movement, that was the power. That was why people like Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Cosby were held accountable. It was because of the amount of survivors that came forward. And typically in the past, either women have done that on their own by
Right.
using whisper networks, or journalists have done that by
Yes.
exposing this. And what Callisto does is make sure that you can do this in a private, protected, secure environment without having to publicly disclose before you're ready, if you're ever ready.
I love that. That is amazing. And I think that the world needs to know about this because this is my first time ever hearing about Callisto.
Yes.
So it's super important to get the word about how it works. Now, you said something about perp accountability. Is that accurate? Did I term that right?
Yes. Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What does that look like? What does that even mean?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people have this misconception about sexual assault that because they've watched too much Law and Order SVU.
Hmm.
So you really think about you report to police, the police does their job, they investigate, there's somebody in the back room that has tons of computers that are they're like searching away and all the databases are connected.
Yes.
That is not accurate
Not at
at
all.
all.
I
Not
work
at
in
all.
criminal justice. It's not accurate. It does not
Not
happen
at
that
all.
way. Go ahead.
The databases are not connected. People are not trained. The law enforcement isn't often trained. They're not trauma informed, and it very rarely gets resolved. I think that the statistic is out of 1,000 sexual assaults, 25 perpetrators even get arrested. And in Chicago, where we're both at, is less.
Yes. And that's
And there was
sad.
just
Don't even get me
yeah,
started. Okay.
yeah. And for Black women who are victims, it's even less.
Oh,
And so we know that people of color and marginalized folks are
yes.
are even more impacted, but that perpetrator accountability is what's going to get them to stop.
Okay.
And so that accountability can look different for a lot of different places, for a lot of different people. And to me, it's about what the victim wants and what the survivor wants. And so some survivors are going to want to have a conversation with the perpetrator and just to say, hey, we know that you've done this to several of us. Stop it. Other people are going to want to go to the police and they're going to want their perpetrator to rot in jail.
Yes.
Other people are going to want to go restorative justice. And
Yes.
so any of those things can stop that perpetrator from offending, and some of them won't stop that perpetrator from
Yeah.
offending. But the accountability can help healing. Not always. There are many survivors that get accountability and their perpetrator goes to jail and they still feel that they have not healed.
Okay.
But in order to stop this cycle and to stop serial perpetrators, accountability in some fashion needs to happen. With that, with us identifying this and having serial perpetrators identified, which they're most of the time not,
Okay.
we can create change in the criminal justice system and create change in accountability and change in the patterned evidence that can be entered into trials and such.
Yes,
Because a lot of
absolutely.
times that is not entered in. That if they have previous perpetrations, unless they have a previous conviction, which most of the time they're not going to,
Right.
it's not able to be entered in right now.
Now, there are some interesting women on Callisto's board. Are you able to talk about that?
Yes, we have an amazing board, and I'm going to highlight a couple. First of all, we have Rowena Chu, and she came on our board last year, and she is a survivor of Harvey Weinstein.
Wow.
And so when all of the news broke about Harvey Weinstein in 2017, 2018, which then spurred the Toronto Burke's Me Too movement,
Yes.
she was named in that story, but she was anonymous because she was under an NDA.
Okay.
And you can go there. There's a lot of stuff that you can watch on her to see her full story that I don't need to tell. But if you have read the book She Said or watched the movie She Said, what Rowena's experience is written about and shown on that film.
Okay.
And how horrible it was, and how the NDA was, and how so many people protected it. And I think that when you tell survivors, just report, 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 well, she
Yeah.
did.
And nothing
And she was
changed.
silenced.
Right. Yeah.
for decades upon decades, because that happened in the early to mid 90s. And so, she really believes in Callisto because she saw the power of connection, but she also, it took her 2 years to come public with her name, even though people had found her, because she didn't know that like how safe it was, because Harvey Weinstein had followed her for 20, 30 years. And so it took her a long time. And so she wished that she would have had that ability to connect. And for the people that she knew what was happening to, with all of the time she has told her story, that people come up and say me too to her. And that if you don't have a famous perpetrator,
Right.
the journalists don't want to actually report the story.
Isn't that something? Because then they don't get the recognition, because that's what it is. It's like, I'm jumping on this story because they're going to say, X story written by Jane Doe. And then you get that
Exactly.
recognition. So they don't want to do it. If nothing, they're not going to get the glory too.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's all, I mean, telling survivor stories is about money and what money is going to make the publication. And so while it's really important for us to have those stories,
Right.
it is not about the survivor most of the time.
Which is crazy
And
in
so
today's
we make
climate.
ours about the survivor. The one of the other people on our board is Mo Ryan, and she is a journalist who
Ooh.
has really done this Me Too journalism for a long time, for
Okay.
decades. And she has a number one New York Times bestselling book
Mm.
that is called Burn It Down. I highly recommend
Ooh.
everybody read it. It's
Okay.
incredible, and it's really about the entertainment industry because she's a movie critic and a show critic.
Look at
And she
that.
talks about how sexism, racism, homophobia really impacts Hollywood, but how it leads to sexual assault and how it's covered up, and how, racism is covered up in a lot of these shows. And there's a lot of shows that I have to look at differently after reading her book. So,
Wow.
but she has really uncovered a lot of it, and she sees the underbelly of Hollywood. And in that book, how I got connected with her a couple years ago was that I was listening to her audiobook, and I was like, well, the solution's Callisto. The solution's Callisto. The solution's Callisto. And at the last chapter, she says there are solutions out there, and one is Callisto. And so we were able to connect, and now she's joined our board to really promote this, because independently she saw this as a solution to prevent sexual assaults in Hollywood and everywhere.
That is amazing. Now we keep talking about Callisto. Where is Callisto? Where can people listening find Callisto?
Yeah, so projectcallisto.org is our website. And so you can go, if you have a .edu, you can go to callistovault.org and go right to there to create an account. But if you're looking for more information or how to spread the word on your campus, projectcallisto.org. Or you can go to our Instagram at Callisto. We're pretty active on LinkedIn as well.
Now, let's say an adult woman who is not in school, so she would not have a .edu email. How can she use Callisto?
Currently, right now, she cannot unless she has an alumni account, and a lot of schools will allow people to have alumni accounts. So if at one point she went to college, she might be able to see if she can have access to that. If not, we are looking to expand beyond .edus, and so that will keep following us at Callisto on Instagram. Sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get updates about how our progress is going about expanding, because we're working on that in the next year or two.
So currently, only students with .edus email addresses and alumni with .edu email addresses can participate.
Yep. Students, faculty, professors,
Okay.
anybody. Yep. And it
Okay.
doesn't matter who the perpetrator is. So you can name any perpetrator. It doesn't have to be connected to your school. It doesn't have to happen on campus. And we let you define what sexual assault is. So we're not defining it by criminal standards, by civil standards. We're defining it by, did you feel violated?
Okay. Is there like a time limit that you guys are putting in
No.
there? So
Nope. We've had
anytime.
anytime, anytime. So, if it happens when you're at school, there's going to be more likelihood of a match. But again,
Okay.
you could add in a perpetrator from your childhood if you have access. The
Hmm.
chances of a match are probably slim
Okay.
at this point until we continue to expand just mathematically, but it doesn't mean that you can't use the system.
That's what I was going to say too. So let's say you put in a person, even if it's somebody like now, let's say it happened 6 months ago, and you put in a person and there's a match. Well, I'm sorry, there's no match. You don't get contacted, or you only get contacted when there's a match.
You only get contacted when there's a match, and it can you're until you delete your entry, it will stay in the system. So we've had matches happen where a year later, so we've had a match where two people connected, and then a year later, a third person connected, and 6 months later, another person connected.
And
So
just
it can be cumulative as people learn about Callisto,
use
as
it.
that perpetrator hasn't been held accountable and continues to offend, because such few people have been held accountable and a lot of people keep their .edus or their professors and they're reporting things from decades ago, we're also finding matches that the assault happened 10 years ago.
And just so I'm clear, the match is a fellow survivor, not that
Yes,
person.
correct. The match is with a fellow survivor that has been harmed by the same person.
Okay, that's what I wanted to be clear on, so that the listening audience knows you're not matching up perpetrators. You're
No,
matching up survivors together so that
we do
they
not contact the perpetrator. The perpetrator will not know that they have been identified in our system unless the survivor shares that. But
exactly.
we do not share that. We are legally not allowed to share that with how our systems are set up and either we don't have it because our technology is so encrypted, or those legal options counselors are protected from sharing any of that information. So a lot of people say, well, what about false reports?
Right.
And it's a completely enclosed system. So there is no false reporting because we don't report to police. We don't report to
Exactly.
Title IX. And it is the survivor that will do that. And they could falsely accuse, like somebody could falsely accuse somebody without using Callisto, and using
Hmm.
Callisto gives them no advantage to falsely accuse anybody.
Right.
And there are some things that I don't talk about publicly that we have measures in place
Mm.
to make sure that they're not false accusations or false reports, that somebody's kind of digging in to see if somebody's matched with
That they could
themselves or to
slip
match with somebody
through.
else, because we are really for the survivors and those direct survivors to match.
No, that's super good.
And
Now,
that's again why it's not like a Tinder or a Match situation,
right.
like a Match.com situation, like a dating app, because we don't want them to know right away, because that's not safe. Because then a perpetrator could put
Exactly.
in their own information. And so
Yeah.
we have a lot of mechanisms on the back end to make sure that that doesn't happen.
And I love that. Now, anytime we do an episode, I always like to leave the listeners with takeaways. Considering the new technology that is Callisto, considering your work for the past 25 years, what takeaway would you want to leave with my listening audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you know somebody with a .edu or you yourself have a .edu, check it out. projectcallisto.org. We need to spread the word. Our system gets better the more people that know about it, which is why I'm so excited to come on here. Even if you don't have the .edu, there's ways to support us by following us on social media, so that can help us expand
Exactly.
more quickly, and follow along on our journey and spread the word. A lot of people don't like to talk about sexual violence. They don't like to follow accounts about sexual violence, but it's really important. It's really important to do, and it shows other survivors in your life, because you know other survivors in your life that you support them, and it also shows perpetrators in your life that you will hold them accountable.
Exactly. I love that. And I am a super fan of Callisto, and I'm going to make sure that all of my accounts are following Callisto, because a lot of people will follow me and follow the things that I'm following. So consider yourself with a new
Thank you.
subscriber today. And I just want to make sure that everybody are they able to follow you as well, or just Callisto? You're like the person that runs it, the social media, I'm
Yep.
saying.
I do not run the social media. We have an amazing team that does that. I am on Instagram at, what is it, Tracy DeTomasi. It might
Okay.
be Tracy.DeTomasi, I'm not sure. And then you
Okay.
can also find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome, awesome. So, Tracy, I want to thank you so much for being my special guest today. It is always, always a pleasure to have someone who's doing something so big, creating such social change like what you guys at Callisto are doing. This is huge.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for helping us spread the word.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. And I want to thank the listening audience out there. If you have not already done so, please like, subscribe, and share. Please tell a friend to tell a friend about Criminal Justice Corner, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you.